Morning, everybody. It's February 26, 2025, and I want to make this video. I'm going to read something. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to read this to you, and it is, this is the full text of Army Talk Orientation Fact Sheet number 64 on fascism. Okay, this was written in March of 1945. So we know we just got, we're dealing with Hitler. We just finished dealing with Hitler. So this is what I want to read, okay? And it begins. Fascism is not the easiest thing to identify, nor analyze once it's in power. Now, part of this page got cut, so I'm going to skip down one paragraph. You're away from home, separated from your family, no longer at civilian jobs or at school, and many of you are risking your very lives because of a thing called fascism. Our country was attacked by the fascist aggressor Japan. The Sons of Heaven were promptly joined by their fascist partners of Germany and Italy. Fascism is a word that has been used a great deal in these last few years. We come across it in our newspapers, we hear it in our newsreels, it comes up in our bull sessions. We've heard about the cruelties of fascism, its terrors, its conquests of country after country. We've heard of its concentration camps like Dachau in Germany, and its torture chambers like Majdanek in Poland. We've heard of its planned mass murder of whole peoples, which scholars call genocide. Some of the things that have been done to people by fascists seem too horrible to believe, especially to Americans who believe in live and let live. Hard-boiled American correspondents, formerly skeptical, now believe because they have seen. We Americans have been fighting fascists for more than 3 years. When Cecil Brown, one of the war's leading correspondents, came back from the battlefronts, he went on a trip that took him into the big cities and small towns all over America. He talked and listened to all kinds of people. He found that most Americans are vague about what fascism really means. He found few Americans who were confident they would recognize a fascist if they saw one. And are we in uniform any more certain what fascism is, where it came from, and what made it strong? Do we know how fascism leads men to do things done to people at Majdanek? Do we know how it leads them to attack helpless nations? Are Majdaneks and war inevitable results of fascism? Do all fascists speak only German, Italian, or Japanese? Or do some of them speak our language? Will military victory in this war automatically kill fascism, or could fascism rise up in the United States after it's been crushed abroad? What can we do to prevent it? Perhaps we ought to get to know the answers. If we don't understand fascism and recognize fascism when we see it, it might crop up again under another label and cause another war. Now, in my words, I'm thinking MAGA. But I digress. Fascism is a way to run a country. It's the way Italy was run and the way Germany and Japan are run. Fascism is the precise opposite of democracy. The people run democratic governments, but fascist governments run the people. Pay attention. Fascism is government by the few and for the few. The objective is seizure and control of the economic, political, social, and cultural life of the state. Why? The democratic way of life interferes with their methods and desires for 1, conducting business, 2, living with their fellow men, 3, having the final say in matters concerning others as well as themselves. The basic principles of democracy stand in the way of their desires. Hence, democracy must go. Anyone who is not a member of their inner gang has to do what he's told. They permit no civil liberties, no equality before the law. They make their own rules and change them when they choose. If you don't like it, it's tough shit. They maintain themselves in power by use of force, combined with propaganda based on primitive ideas of blood and race, by skillful manipulation of fear and hate, and by false promise of security. The propaganda glorifies war and insists it is smart and realistic to be pitiless and violent. You may find the foregoing material a useful basis for a brief introductory talk. How it starts. Questions. How does fascism get into power? How can a violent program that enslaves the people win any support? Fascism came into power in Germany, Italy, and Japan at a time of social and economic unrest. A small group of men, supported in secret by powerful financial and military interests, convinced enough insecure people that fascism would give them the things they wanted. They did so partly by clever propaganda and deception. They promised the people that fascism would bring them great power and prosperity. The details differed from country to country, but the general pattern was the same. The Japanese spoke of the greater Asian co-prosperity sphere. Mussolini mouthed humanitarian ideals and promised a reborn Roman Empire. Hitler and his associates adopted the name of National Socialist German Worker Party, Nazis, and announced objectives that attracted many German people. The official title of the Nazi Party was deliberately worded for its propaganda value, appealing to nationalists, socialists, workers, and all others who might be favorably influenced by these labels. At the very time that the fascists proclaimed that their party was the party of the average citizen, they were in the pay of certain big industrialists and financiers who wanted to run the people with an iron hand. The fascists promised everything to everyone. They would make the poor rich and the rich richer. To the farmers, the fascists promised land through elimination of large estates. To the workers, they promised elimination of unemployment, jobs for all at high wages. To the small businessmen, they promised more customers and profits through the elimination of large business enterprises. To big businessmen and the industrialists, they secretly promised greater security and profits through the elimination of small business competitors and trade unions and the crushing of socialists and communists. To the whole nation, they promised glory and wealth by conquest. They asserted it was their right as a superior people to rule the world. As soon as these methods had won them enough of a following to form their stormtroopers, the fascists began using force to stifle and wipe out any opposition. Those who saw through the false front of fascism and opposed them were beaten, tortured, and killed. The fascists knew that all believers in democracy were their enemies. They knew that the fundamental principles of democracy, faith in the common sense of the people, was the direct opposite of the fascist principle of the rule by the elite few. So they fought democracy in all its phases. At the same time that they proclaimed the superiority of the Germans and the Italians, the Japanese, they proclaimed also that the Germans, the Italians, and Japanese people were really unfit to rule themselves. It became Heil Hitler in Germany and believe, obey, and fight in Italy. They played political, religious, social, and economic groups against each other and seized power while these groups struggled against each other. How it works. Question: how do the fascists keep their contradictory promises once they got in policy? How do their programs actually work out? Well, let's go on. It was easy enough for the fascists to promise all the things to all people before they were in power. Once they were actually in power, they could not, of course, keep their contradictory promises. They had intended in advance to break some, and they did break those that they made to the middle classes, the workers, and the farmers. As soon as the fascists were in control of the government, the torturing and the killings were no longer the unlawful acts of a political party and its hoodlum gangs. They became official government policy. Among the first victims of its official policy were those farmers, workers, and small businessmen who had believed the promise that they had been made to them and who complained that they had been suckered in. Some simply vanished. Often they came home to their families by return mail and little jars of ashes. The concentration camps and graves filled with the opponents of fascism outwent equality before the law, free elections, and free political parties, independent trade unions, and independent schools, freedom of speech and freedom of the press, and in time, freedom of religion. Pastor Niemöller was thrown into a concentration camp in Germany. Cardinal Initzer was stoned, and Catholic priests were imprisoned. Jews were murdered in cold blood, and synagogues destroyed. Christian ministers, and Christian ministers were ousted from Japan. The fascists solved unemployment by converting their nation into giant war machines. The unemployed were either conscripted into the army or organized into labor battalions and put to work in war plants. Now, I stumble here a little bit because this thing doesn't have a lot of punctuation marks and the ink's kind of iffy. But anyway, here we go. Deprived of their unions, the working people could be driven to work longer and harder for less and less money, so that those who subsidized and ran fascism could grow richer. By wiping out all internal competition, especially the small and medium-sized business firms, profits were increased still higher for the handful on top. In some cases, the fascists then gobbled control of the top corporations. The living standards of the masses of the people declined, of course. As they earned less and less, they were able to buy less and less of the goods that they produced. Every last detail of life was regulated with a death penalty often imposed for slight violations. One unhappy victim complained, "Fascism is a regime under which everything not prohibited is compulsory." Once the fascists were in control of the government, not even the gang on top was safe from its own members. There would be more loot and power per fascist leader if some fascist leaders were eliminated. Some of the party, big shots, and some of those who had helped them take over were therefore purged. Many would be partnered in the dictatorship, including some industries. Some wound up in jail, some in exile, or dead. Fascism equals war? Question: if we leave fascist nations alone, will they leave us alone? Or does fascism inevitably lead to war? We have seen that the people of the fascist state earn less and less, and so are able to buy less and less of the goods that they produce with their slave labor. This means that eventually the fascist leaders either have to abandon the system or look abroad for new markets to dispose of the mounting surplus of goods that cannot be sold at home. Kind of like how Trump is taking away our trading abilities with Canada and Mexico, and now Canada and Mexico are finding other people to trade with. So all the food and goods that we would usually get, we won't get anymore. Okay, they're talking about in here in this paperwork about starving people out. Here you go. Okay, pay attention. The fascists do not choose to abandon their system and give up their graft. Oh boy, Trump is the grifter in chief for sure. And so they are forced to acquire foreign markets and to eliminate competing nations. Due to their slave labor, the fascists are able to undersell the free nations of the world. The free nation must either resort to fascism, so that with slave labor they can meet the cutthroat prices of the fascist nation, or they must erect trade barriers to keep out the ruthless fascist competition. See Douglas Miller, You Can't Do Business with Hitler. In either case, the fascist nation still wants the market, and it goes after them with the same methods used in domestic affairs: intimidation, terror, and force. In foreign affairs, force means war. The war machine is ready, waiting for duty to justify the building of the war machine as the solution to unemployment. The fascists nurture a lust for war, a desire for conquest, living dangerously, said Mussolini. Man has become great through perpetual strife, screamed Hitler. A Nazi slogan was, "Guns instead of butter." The hungry people were told they would get butter and other riches in due time by way of conquest. The press, radio, movie, stage, all were put to task of glorifying war. The school system, from kindergarten to university, justified and exalted tyranny of the strong over the weak. The school is the preparation for the army, said the Nazi Minister of Education. The people were taught that their race was superior, since this concept of superior and inferior race is completely contrary to the findings of all science. Science has to be carefully controlled and perverted as the schools. No scientist in Germany could safely deny it when Hitler told the Germans that they were a master race entitled to the land and possessions of the lesser folk. The Italians were told in fake science terms that Latins were born to rule. The Japanese were taught that the sons of heaven, it was their right and their duty to conquer and rule the world. Once their people were sold on this master race idea, it was easy for the fascists to make them feel that other people were of no more consequence than vermin. We think nothing of killing a cockroach. They were encouraged to think nothing of killing unarmed and defenseless men, women, and children. Many even got to enjoy it. Hence, Rotterdam, Ladies, Medanich. By all these devices, fascism creates, and then it's driven by forces that cannot be stopped at will. Fascism cannot stand still. Its internal and external policies are rooted in aggression. It must expand or explode. It must conquer or perish. Every measure to be taken by fascism, its entire economic, social, political, and military setup, means eventual war. The war comes when intimidation and terror fail as instruments of fascist foreign policy. The war, when it comes to nations, finally refuses further to appease the insatiable hunger of fascism for markets, military glory, and world domination. Can it happen here? Some Americans would give an emphatic no to the question, can fascism come to America after it has been defeated abroad? They would say Americans are too smart, that they are sold on the democratic way of life, and that they wouldn't permit any group to put fascism over America. Fascism, some might say, is something peculiar that you find only among people who like swastikas, who like to listen to speeches from balconies in Rome, or who like to think that their emperor is God. Their reaction might be that it is something foreign that Americans would recognize in a minute, like the goose step. They might feel that we'd laugh it out of existence in a hurry. Remember how recently Elon Musk did the Heil Hitler? Twice, people. Followed by a lot of people who lost their jobs immediately. Do all fascists come from Germany and Japan or Italy? In a good many European nations, the people felt the same way some of us do, that fascist was foreign to them and could never become a power in their land. They found, however, that fascist-minded people within their borders, especially with aid from the outside, could seize power. The Germans, of course, made efficient use of the fascist-minded traitors, whom have come to know generally as the Fifth Column. In France, which was considered the leading democracy of Europe, the betrayal was spearheaded by a powerful clique of native 100% French fascists. Norway had its Quisling, who was the pure blood, a Norwegian, as Laval was a pure-blooded Frenchman. The Netherlands, Mosserts, were 100% Dutch. Belgians, de Graulis, 100% Belgian. The Britons, Mostly's 100% Britain. The United States also had its native fascists who say that they are 100% American. They were native fascists in the Philippines, in Thailand, in China, in Burma, in many other countries, all waiting to become the willing puppets of the Axis. Not one of these fascists is a foreigner who had to be imported from Germany, Japan, or Italy. Question: have any groups in America used fascist tactics and appeals? Most of the people in America like to be good neighbors, but at various times and places in our history we have had sorry instances of mob sadism, lynchings, vigilanteisms, terror, and suppression of civil liberties. We have had our hooded gangs, black legions, silver shirts, and racial and religious bigots, all of them in the name of Americanism, have used undemocratic methods and doctrines which experience has shown can be properly identified as fascist. Can we afford to brush them off as merely crackpots? We once laughed Hitler off as a harmless little clown with a funny mustache. In January 1944, 30 Americans, many of them native-born, were indicted by a federal grand jury on charges of conspiring with the Nazi Party to accomplish the objectives of said Nazi Party in the United States. These objectives, according to the indictment, include undermining and impairing the loyalty and morale of the military and naval forces of the United States. The case ended in a mistrial caused by the death of the presiding judge. The question of re-indictment is still under consideration. Whenever the free government anywhere fail to solve their basic economic and social problems, there is always the danger that a native brand of fascism will arise to exploit the situation and the people. Can we spot it? How can we identify Native American fascists at work? An American fascist seeking power would not proclaim that he is a fascist. Fascism always camouflages its plans and purposes. Hitler made demagogic appeals to all groups and swore, "Neither I nor anybody in the National Socialist Party advocates proceeding by anything but constitutional methods." Sound familiar? Any fascist attempt to gain power in America would not use the exact Hitler pattern. It would work under the guise of super patriotism and super Americanism. Fascist leaders are neither stupid nor naive. They know that they must hand out a line that sells. Huey Long is said to have remarked that if fascism came to America, it would be on a program of Americanism. America first, make America great again. Hello? Fascists in America may differ slightly from fascists in other countries, but there are a number of attitudes and practices that they can have in common. Following are three. Every person who has one of them is not necessarily a fascist, but he is in a mental state that lends itself to the acceptance of fascist aims. Number one, the pitting of religious, racial, and economic groups against one another in order to break down national unity is a device of the divide and conquer technique used by Hitler to gain power in Germany and in other countries. With slight variations to suit local conditions, fascists everywhere have used this Hitler method. In many countries, anti-Semitism, or the hatred of Jews, is a dominant device of fascism. In the United States, native fascists have often been anti-Catholic, anti-Jew, anti-Negro, anti-labor, anti-foreign-born. In South America, the native fascists use the same scapegoats, except that they substitute anti-propagandism for anti-Catholicism. The interwoven with the master race theory of fascism is a well-planned hate campaign against minority races, religions, and other groups. To suit their particular needs and aims, fascists will use any one or a combination of such groups as a convenient scapegoat. 2. Fascism cannot tolerate such religious and ethical concepts as the brotherhood of man. Fascists deny the need for international cooperation. These ideas contradict the fascist theory of the master race. The brotherhood of man implies that all people, regardless of color, race, creed, or nationality, have rights. International cooperation, as expressed in the Dumbarton Oaks proposal, runs counter to the fascist program of war and world domination. In place of international cooperation, the fascists seek to substitute a perverted sort of ultranationalism, which tells their people that they are the only people in the world who count. With this goes hatred, suspicion towards other people and of all other nations. Right now, our native fascists are spreading anti-British, anti-Soviet, anti-French, anti-United Nations propaganda. They know that ally unity now foretells the certain defeats of fascism abroad. They know that post-war allies unity means world peace and security. They realize that fascism cannot thrive or grow under these conditions. Trump wants to take us out of NATO, right? Okay, let's continue. Number 3. It is accurate to call a member of a communist party a communist. For short, he is often called red. Indiscriminate pinning of the label red on people and proposals which one opposes is a common political device. It is a favorite trick of native and as well as foreign fascists. Many fascists make their spurious claims that the world has but two choices, either fascism or communism. and that they label as communist everyone who refuses to support them. By attacking our free enterprise, capitalist democracy, and by denying the effectiveness of our way of life, they hope to trap many people. Hitler insisted that only fascism would save Europe and the world from the communist menace. There are many people inside and outside Germany and Italy who welcomed and supported Hitler and Mussolini because they believed fascism was the only safeguard against communism. The Red Bogey was a convincing enough argument to help Hitler take and maintain power. The Rome-Berlin-Tokyo axis, whose aggression plunged the world into global war, was called the Comintern axis. It was proclaimed by Hitler, Mussolini, and Hirohito as a bulwark against communism. Learning to identify native fascists and to detect their techniques is not easy. They planned it that way. But it is vitally important to learn to spot them, even though they adapt names and slogans with popular appeal, drape themselves with the American flag, and attempt to carry out their programs in the name of democracy that they are trying to destroy, for a scapegoat as a way out. Fascism is always ready to provide one. In its bid for power, it is ready to drive wedges that will disunite the people, weaken the nation. It supplies the scapegoat: Catholics, Jews, Negroes, labor, schools, unions, big business, any group upon which the insecure and unemployed. How to stop it? Question: how can we prevent fascism from developing in the United States? The only way we can prevent fascism from getting hold in America is by making our democracy work and by actively cooperating to preserve world peace, security. The opposite of this current administration in 2025. Lots of things can happen inside of people when they are unemployed or hungry. They become frightened, angry, desperate, confused. Many, in their misery, seek to find someone to blame. Look, they look to be... I don't know, this is all wrong here. They're to be brought to pin the blame on their misfortune. Oh, okay. They look to pin the blame... whatever. We all know that the many serious problems we face when war is over. If there is a period of economic stress, it will create tensions among our people, including us as returning veterans. The resentment may be directed against minorities, especially if undemocratic organizations with power and money can direct our emotions and thinking along these lines. The fascist doctrine of hate fulfills a triple mission. By creating disunity, it weakens democracy. By getting men to hate rather than to think, it prevents men from seeking the real cause and the democratic solution to the problem. By fake promises of jobs and security, fascism then tries to lure men to its program as a way out of insecurity. Only by democratically solving the economic problems of our day can there be any certainty that fascism won't happen here. That is our job as citizens. Citizens in a democracy is more than just a ballot dropped in a box on election day. It is a 365 days a year job requiring the active participation and best judgment of every citizen in the affairs of its community, his nation, and his country's relations within the world. Fascism thrives on indifference and ignorance. It makes headway when people are apathetic or cynical about their government, when they think of it as something far removed from them and beyond their personal concern. The erection of a traffic light on your block is important to your safety and the safety of your children. The erection of a world organization to safeguard peace and world security is just as important to our personal security. Both must be the concern of every citizen. Freedom, like peace and security, cannot be maintained in isolation. It involves being alert and on guard against the infringement not only of our own freedom but the freedom of every American. If we permit discrimination, prejudice, or hate to rob anyone of his democratic rights, our own freedoms and all democracy is threatened. What is true of America is true of the world. The germ of fascism cannot be quarantined in the Munich Brown House or the balcony in Rome. If we want to make certain that fascism does not come to America, we must make certain that it does not thrive anywhere else in the world. To sum up, I see two diametrically opposed principles. The principles of democracy, which, wherever it is allowed, practical effects is the principle of destruction, and the principle of authority of personality, which I would call the principle of achievement. Words of Adolf Hitler. Boy, I'll tell you, there's a lot more to this, but I've rambled for 30 minutes, over 30 minutes. Okay. Just absorb it. I'll read the rest on the next post.